My name is Lucas. I am 32 years old, and music has been the center of my life since I was a child. While other kids played ball in the street, I sat at an old upright piano, pressing keys until my fingers ached, searching for a sound that felt like home. I worked nights, taught restless students, and played smoky bars just to save every dollar I could. It took me 10 long years to finally buy my dream instrument, a Steinway grand piano. It was not just an object. It was my voice, my soul, and the proof that persistence could outshine favoritism. My family has never truly understood. My sister Clara has always been their golden child. Every ribbon she won was paraded through the house. Every boyfriend adored. Every whim indulged. And me, my parents called music a hobby, something impractical, a distraction from real life. They never noticed the nights I practiced until dawn, or the years I lived off instant noodles to afford lessons. Still, I thought they respected the one boundary I had made clear. My piano was mine. No one touched it. No one moved it. That was sacred ground. I never imagined coming home from a tour to find an empty space where my Steinway once stood. The polished floor held a pale outline, like a ghost of what had been there. My chest tightened, as if I had lost a person, not an instrument. Confused, I ran my hand over the cold wood floor and asked where it had gone. Then, as if this were the most natural thing in the world, my parents smiled. My father said proudly, "We sold it, son." My mother added, "Clara deserved the wedding of her dreams. Thanks to your piano, she had it." She said it like it was an act of love. My heart hammered in my ears. I stared at them, unable to breathe. My sister's glamorous wedding photos were already flooding social media. Her in a designer dress, guests raising crystal glasses, the kind of event that looked ripped from a magazine spread. And I realized, with a sickening twist in my stomach, that my Steinway had been the price tag for her fairy tale. I asked again, slower this time, almost whispering, "You sold my piano?" My mom tilted her chin, almost sneering. "Don't look so dramatic. You're young. You'll buy another. Clara only gets married once. Family sacrifices for each other. That's what real love looks like." My lips curled into a bitter smile. I didn't mean to give. My hands trembled as if searching for keys that weren't there. Something inside me cracked. Not just anger, not just grief, but disbelief that the two people who had raised me could strip away the one thing that had given me strength. I let out a quiet chuckle, and that laugh seemed to slice through the air. My mother snapped instantly. "What is so funny?" But I didn't answer. I just looked at the space on the floor, the ghost of my piano, and wondered how long they had planned this betrayal. Sometimes I think life has a cruel way of testing how far family loyalty can be stretched before it breaks. If your parents sold the very thing you spent your life building to give your sibling a dream party, would you forgive them? Or would you finally draw the line? Hit that subscribe button if you have ever had family members who think your hard work or your dreams don't matter as much as someone else's. Trust me, the way this story unfolded will make you question where love ends and favoritism begins. My love affair with the piano began when I was only 6 years old. Back then, our living room held a battered upright piano, keys yellowed with age, and a few strings forever out of tune. Most kids my age dreaded lessons. But I would sit on that creaky bench for hours, letting the sound carry me somewhere no words could. When my friends ran to the playground, I stayed behind, pressing black and white keys until my mother's voice called me to dinner. That piano was not perfect, but to me, it was a doorway to another world. Clara, on the other hand, was the shining star of the family. She was the one praised for her grades, her looks, her charm. At every dinner, her stories filled the table with laughter, while mine went unheard. When she wanted a new dress for prom, my parents bought it without question. When I asked for money for lessons, they sighed, saying, "Music won't pay the bills." Their message was clear. Her dreams were worth investing in. Mine were a waste of time. But I refused to give up. I started babysitting, mowing lawns, anything to pay for lessons. My teacher, an old woman with tired hands and sharp eyes, used to say, "Lucas, your heart is louder than your hands. That's what makes a pianist." I clung to those words like lifelines. Every discouragement from home only made me more determined to prove them wrong. Still, the favoritism stung. At Christmas, Clara's gifts piled high, while mine came with a shrug and a line about how boys don't need much. At family gatherings, relatives asked about Clara's future in law or medicine. No one asked about the boy sitting quietly at the piano in the corner. Even then, I knew the sound of applause would never come from my parents. If I wanted validation, I would have to earn it elsewhere. Over time, music became more than a skill. It was my rebellion, my sanctuary. When Clara slammed her bedroom door after an argument, I played scales to drown out the silence. When my father scolded me for wasting electricity practicing late at night, I played softer, but I didn't stop. That upright piano absorbed every tear, every ounce of anger, every hope I could not say aloud. As I grew older, Clara's pedestal only rose higher. She was the homecoming queen, the one who got into a prestigious college with my parents cheering at every milestone. And I was the shadow, pouring every paycheck into sheet music and lessons, my victories known only to me. My parents never once came to a recital, not once. Looking back, I think they truly believed they were doing the right thing, pushing me toward practicality, shaping Clara's life into a picture-perfect future. But favoritism has a way of planting seeds you cannot dig up later, seeds of resentment, of distance, of a child learning that love comes with conditions. And that is why the Steinway mattered so much. It wasn't just an instrument. It was the proof that I could take every slight, every rejection, every moment of being invisible, and turn it into something undeniable. For once, I had carved out something no one could dismiss. Or, so I thought. Dreams rarely arrive wrapped in gold. Mine came piece by piece, through nights that smelled of stale beer and mornings that began with aching fingers. I played anywhere they would let me. A dim bar tucked behind a gas station, a wedding reception where no one listened, a church service where the piano keys stuck from years of humidity. Every dollar I earned was folded away, not for clothes or vacations, but for a single vision, a Steinway grand piano. I can still remember the first night I stepped on stage at a little dive bar downtown. The microphone squealed. The crowd was more interested in their drinks than in me, and the pay barely covered gas money. But when I pressed my fingers to the keys, I felt alive. It was as if the noise of the world faded, and for a moment, I was speaking a language no one could interrupt. People clapped half-heartedly, but I didn't care. For me, every note was a step toward something greater. By day, I gave lessons. Children who didn't want to practice, teenagers who rolled their eyes, parents who asked for discounts. Still, I taught with patience, because their payments went straight into the jar I kept hidden in my closet. Month by month, the jar filled. I skipped meals, patched worn shoes, and smiled through exhaustion, all for the dream of owning a piano that would not crumble under my hands. Years passed like that, Friends married, bought houses, built families. My life was smaller. Cheap apartments, secondhand furniture, a suitcase, always half-packed. But I had one thing that carried me through: the image of that Steinway. To me, it was more than wood and wire. It was dignity. It was proof that my sacrifices meant something. I will never forget the day it finally arrived. A delivery truck pulled up to the narrow street outside my building. The movers groaned as they maneuvered it through the doorway, their hands straining beneath the polished weight of it. When they set it down in my small studio, the room seemed to transform. The black lacquer gleamed under the light, its curved body like a sculpture of promise. I ran my hands along the surface, hardly believing it was mine. The first time I pressed the keys, I cried. Not a delicate tear, but a rush of sobs I had held in for years. Every note rang out with a depth the old upright could never carry. It was like touching the heart of something eternal. For once, I did not feel like the overlooked son or the sibling in the shadows. I felt like a man who had built something no one could take away. From that day on, the Steinway became the center of my world. Every performance I booked, every song I wrote, every student I inspired flowed through those keys. It was not just an instrument, it was my companion, my anchor. When life felt unbearable, I played until my heart calmed. When hope seemed far away, the Steinway reminded me of what persistence could build. It stood there like a silent witness to my journey. The sound of its notes filled not just the room, but the cracks in my soul. And I thought, foolishly perhaps, that it would always be safe, untouched, respected. Because who could look at something born of so much sacrifice and think it was theirs to sell? The day I confronted them, the air in the house felt heavier than usual, as if even the walls knew what had been done. I stood in the empty space where my Steinway had once lived, my hand still brushing over the pale outline on the floor. The silence was unbearable, and finally I asked again, slower this time, "You really sold my piano without asking me?" My father didn't even flinch. He looked at me the way someone might look at a child throwing a tantrum. "You're young, Lucas. You'll buy another. But weddings only happen once. Clara deserved the best." I blinked, trying to process the words. My mother chimed in quickly, her tone sharp, as if I were the selfish one in this room. "You've always been so dramatic. Music is important to you." "Yes, but it's not life or death. This was for family, for love. Surely you can understand that." And then Clara, still glowing from her fairy tale wedding, leaned against the kitchen counter with a glass of wine in her hand. She smirked in that way only a younger sister can, with just enough condescension to sting. "Come on, Lucas. Be happy for me. You'll thank us one day when you see the photos and realize you helped make it all possible." Something inside me snapped. My laugh came out low and bitter, the kind of laugh that doesn't sound like joy, but like disbelief. "Happy," I repeated, shaking my head. "You want me to be happy that you took the one thing I worked my whole life for? Do you even hear yourselves?" Clara rolled her eyes. "It's just a piano. You can always buy another." That sentence cut deeper than anything. Just a piano, as if it had been a trinket, a piece of furniture, a meaningless toy. To me, it was the years I had spent working while she partied. It was the meals I skipped, the holidays I missed, the tears I poured into practice when no one clapped. And now it was gone, dismissed as just something replaceable. I turned toward my parents. "Do you realize what you've done? That wasn't money you sold. That wasn't wooden strings. You sold my soul. You sold the proof that I mattered, that for once in my life, I wasn't just the shadow in this family. For a moment, there was silence. I think they expected me to shout, maybe to slam a door and storm out like an angry teenager. But instead, I stood very still. My hands trembled at my sides, fingers twitching like they were searching for keys that no longer existed. My father cleared his throat, as if trying to soften the blow. "Lucas, you'll understand when you're older. We did this for love, for family. Sacrifices have to be made." The irony nearly choked me. Sacrifice. That was a word I knew better than anyone in that room. I had been sacrificing since I was old enough to shovel snow for a few dollars. I had given up sleep, food, and recognition. I had built something from nothing. And now they dared to lecture me about sacrifice while sipping wine at my expense. I looked at them, my parents, who were supposed to protect what mattered most to me, and my sister, who wore entitlement like a crown. And I realized something I had never admitted before. In their eyes, I had never been the son worth celebrating. I had been the resource, the backup plan, the wallet they didn't have to fill. I let the bitterness curl into words as sharp as broken glass. "Family," I said slowly. "You talk about family like it means love, but all I see is theft dressed up as devotion." They didn't answer. Clara's smile faltered just slightly, but my parents stood firm, believing they had done something noble. They thought I would bend, like always, but in that silence, I knew this time I would not. For days after the confrontation, the house sat in a strange silence. My parents carried themselves as if nothing was wrong, as if they had done something noble, even honorable. Clara floated around, showing off her wedding photos, basking in the glow of a celebration funded by my sacrifice. But inside me, the storm was brewing. They thought they had stolen the crown jewel of my life. They thought they had gutted me, reduced me to nothing but regret. The truth was far more complicated. One evening, we sat together at the dining table, the air brittle with unspoken words. My mother finally broke the silence. "Lucas, it's time to let this go. The piano is gone. Clara is married. We all move on. That's what families do." I stared at her for a long moment, then at Clara, who wore a smug little smile as if she had won. My father cleared his throat, nodding, certain that the matter was closed. That was when I leaned back in my chair and let a small, cold smile curl at the edge of my lips. "You really believe you sold my Steinway, don't you?" The room went still. My father frowned. "Of course we did. The man paid good money. What are you trying to say?" I folded my hands slowly, almost like a pianist preparing to play. "That wasn't my Steinway. Not even close." Clara laughed, sharp and dismissive. "Don't be ridiculous. We know what piano you had. We sold it fair and square." But I shook my head. "No, you sold an old practice piano. A battered one I kept for rehearsals. The real Steinway, the one I spent a decade building my life to afford, wasn't even here when you made your little deal." Their faces shifted. Confusion at first, then something darker, fear. My mother's fork clattered against her plate. "What do you mean it wasn't here?" I leaned forward, my voice steady. "Before I left for tour, I signed a contract with a theater company. Part of that deal required me to place the Steinway in their secure storage facility. It's insured, documented, and waiting for me in a climate-controlled warehouse. Safe, untouched." I let the words sink in. My father's lips tightened, his color draining. Clara blinked rapidly, her smirk evaporating. My mother shook her head in disbelief. "So, what did we sell?" I almost pitied them. Almost. "You sold a worthless practice piano. One I never bothered to tune anymore. One I left behind because it didn't matter. But you didn't stop there, did you? You forged papers, signed my name, pretended you had the right. That's fraud. That's theft. That's a crime. Clara's wine glass slipped from her hand, shattering against the hardwood floor. She stammered, "You're lying. You're making this up to punish us." I stood, my chair scraping loud against the silence. Am I? Then explain why the buyer called me directly, furious that the instrument wasn't what he paid for. Explain why he's already threatening charges. You wanted a fairy tale wedding, Clara. What you bought instead is a nightmare none of you can run from. My father's face collapsed into panic. My mother covered her mouth with trembling fingers, and Clara, for the first time in her life, looked small. I felt no triumph, only clarity. They had thought they stripped me of everything. But the truth was, they had only exposed themselves. And, for the first time, I was the one holding the keys. The call came the very next morning. I was sipping coffee when my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. On the other end was the buyer, his voice sharp, furious, laced with curses. He shouted that the piano he received was not the Steinway he had been promised. He demanded answers, demanded compensation, and threatened legal action. I didn't have to say much. I simply told him the truth, that I had never agreed to the sale, that my parents had forged documents and made the deal behind my back. The silence that followed was heavier than his shouting had been. Then he snapped, "So they scammed me. Fine, I'll see them in court." And the line went dead. When I turned to face my family, their masks of superiority had finally cracked. My mother's face was pale, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. My father paced the room, muttering under his breath, as if some magical excuse might appear to save him. Clara sat frozen, her makeup smudged from tears she hadn't even bothered to wipe away. The fairy tale glow of her wedding had evaporated overnight. The photos she had proudly posted online were now being shared with mocking captions. Rumors spread quickly in our town, people whispering about how the perfect family had conned a man to fund their daughter's big day. I watched it all unfold with a strange detachment, like standing in the eye of a storm. For once, I wasn't the one scrambling to prove myself. They were. My parents who had dismissed my music as meaningless, my sister who had treated me as a walking bank account. They were finally choking on the consequences of their entitlement. My father tried to reason with me. "Lucas, maybe you can talk to him, smooth things over. Tell him you'll make it right." I stared at him, stunned by his audacity. Make it right? I didn't sell him anything. You did. You forged my name. You took the money. This is your mess. Clara broke then, her voice cracking. I didn't know it would go this far. I just wanted a beautiful wedding. Please, Lucas, fix this before it ruins me. Her words hit me harder than I expected. Not because I pitied her, but because it was the first time I heard her admit fear. She wasn't worried about me or about the crime they had committed. She was worried about her reputation, about the glossy image she had fought to preserve. I shook my head slowly. You wanted the spotlight, Clara. Well, here it is. But this stage doesn't forgive false notes. The room fell quiet. For the first time in years, no one had a retort. No one had a lecture about sacrifice or family duty. They were cornered, exposed, and they knew it. I could have walked out then, let them stew in their panic. But part of me wanted them to feel the weight of what they had done. Not just to me, but to themselves. I wanted them to understand that some lines, once crossed, can never be redrawn. So I said nothing more. I just let the silence press down, heavy and unrelenting, until they looked at one another with wide, frightened eyes. Sometimes, justice doesn't arrive with gavel or jury. Sometimes it arrives in whispers, in shame, in the sudden realization that the empire you built on favoritism and selfishness has started to crumble. And I wonder, if it were your family in this storm, would you step in to shield them? Or would you let them stand in the chaos they created? The storm finally reached its breaking point when the buyer sent a formal notice, a letter stamped with legal weight, delivered right to the doorstep. My mother's hands shook as she unfolded it, her lips moving silently as she read the words: fraud, forgery, legal action pending. For the first time, I saw the certainty drain from her eyes. My father sat at the table, his face red with anger, though I couldn't tell if it was directed at me, at the buyer, or at himself. He slammed his fist down, muttering, "This has gone too far." But the truth was, it had only gone exactly where it was always heading. Choices have consequences, and theirs had finally arrived. That evening, I walked in with my lawyer, a calm man in a gray suit, carrying a leather briefcase. He placed documents neatly on the table. "These are the terms," he said, his voice steady. "Repayment in full, plus damages. No negotiation on that point. Either you agree, or you face charges." The room erupted. My mother burst into tears, pleading, "Lucas, please, we're your parents. You can't do this to us." Clara wailed about her marriage being ruined, her voice shrill and desperate. My father argued, bargaining like a man at a marketplace. But the lawyer didn't flinch. I stood silent for most of it, watching the people who had once claimed authority over my life squirm, like children caught in a lie. Finally, I spoke. "You sold what was not yours to sell. You dragged my name through the mud. And you expect me to shield you again? No, not this time. The conditions were harsh, but fair. They would repay the buyer every cent. They would cover additional damages for the forgery. To do that, they would need to sell valuables, liquidate savings, even take loans. Clara would not be spared. Part of the repayment would come directly from her. Wedding gifts returned. Expenses clawed back. For once, she would carry her share of the burden. The weight of it hit them hard. My mother wept quietly, whispering that she never thought it would come to this. My father finally leaned back in his chair, his shoulders slumped, defeated. Clara sobbed, "I just wanted one perfect day. Why do I have to pay for everything?" I looked at her, my voice calm. Because perfection built on theft is not perfection. It's a lie, and lies always come with a cost. The final step was the notarized apology. My lawyer insisted, and I agreed. Each of them had to sign a written admission of what they had done, acknowledging the betrayal, the fraud, the disregard for me as both son and brother. Their signatures trembled on the page, each pen stroke carving a wound they could never erase. As they signed, I felt something shift inside me. Not triumph, not revenge, just clarity. For years I had been chasing their approval, longing for them to see me. But in that moment, I understood. I didn't need their recognition anymore. I had my truth, my music, and my dignity intact. They had their shame. When it was over, the lawyer gathered the documents and left. The house was silent, except for the sound of Clara's muffled crying. I stood, looked around the room that had been my childhood prison of favoritism and dismissal, and said softly, "We're done here." And with that, I walked out, leaving them to the ruins of their choices. Weeks later, I stood backstage, the murmur of an audience buzzing beyond the curtain. My hands rested on the polished edge of my Steinway. The real one, the one I had fought and bled for. It gleamed under the lights, patient and steady, like an old friend waiting for me to return. For years, I had played with a hunger to prove something, to show my parents I mattered, to show Clara that I was more than a shadow. But now, the weight of that need had fallen away. What remained was simpler. The music itself, the truth carried in every note. When I stepped onto the stage, the crowd applauded, but their noise faded as soon as I sat down, my fingers hovering above the keys. I took a breath and began. The piece was new. I had titled it Boundaries. It opened with a sorrowful melody, low and deliberate, echoing the grief of betrayal. Then, slowly, it rose into a storm. Angry chords, fierce rhythms, the sound of defiance against a lifetime of dismissal. In the final movement, the anger softened, shifting into something triumphant yet bittersweet, like sunlight breaking through clouds after a storm. As the notes filled the hall, I felt years of silence give way. It wasn't just music, it was confession. It was survival. It was the story of a boy who had been told his dreams didn't matter, who had been betrayed by the people meant to protect him, and who had still found his voice anyway. When the last chord rang out, there was a pause. A stillness so complete, it felt like the world was holding its breath. Then the applause came, loud, unrelenting, rising to its feet. But I didn't bow right away. I just sat for a moment longer, my hand on the keys, feeling the heartbeat of the Steinway beneath my palm. Later that night, alone in my apartment, I reflected on everything. The betrayal still hurt. The scars were still there. But so was the music. And that, I realized, was enough. I thought of my parents. Now burdened with debts and the shame of their choices, I thought of Clara, no longer the golden child, but a woman forced to face consequences for the first time in her life. Perhaps they would change. Perhaps not. Either way, I was free. Music had taught me something I wished I had learned sooner. One wrong note can disrupt the entire song. And family, too, can fall out of harmony when love turns into control, when sacrifice is demanded instead of offered. You cannot cross boundaries without breaking something precious. Yet, even in brokenness, there is a strange kind of grace, because out of betrayal came clarity, out of silence came music, out of loss came freedom. That night I sat at my Steinway, the stage lights gone, the crowd no longer watching, and I played again, this time just for myself. The notes floated gently into the dark, carrying both sorrow and peace. For the first time in years, I wasn't playing to prove anything. I was simply playing because I was alive, and that, in the end, was enough. Christ teaches us that real love is shown when we care for one another and help carry each other's burdens. Sometimes, the hardest lessons come from family itself, when favoritism or selfishness makes us feel unseen. But even in betrayal, we're reminded that forgiveness, in setting healthy boundaries, can lead us back to peace. This story isn't just about a piano being sold. It's about the truth that every person has a song inside them, a gift that no one else has the right to take away. When we honor each other's dreams, we keep both love and dignity alive. And if these lessons resonate with you, if you believe that sharing stories can bring light and reflection into someone's life, then walking together with this channel is one small way we continue lifting each other up.